this is it. This is the week. I almost played the Star Wars intro music because I want that feeling also, like, like just this is it. This is the big epic. This is the main event. I used to watch wrestling when I was a kid, and there was the main event, the main event, and this is the main event. Parshat Yitro has in it the main event of the Torah, the main event in Jewish theology, the main event, and that is the revelation at Mount Sinai. It's impossible to overstate the significance of this moment for Jewish theology, for Judaism. It first of all just it legitimizes the whole Torah, right? That the idea here is it becomes eventually the significance of this moment is that this is God showing the people that God is talking and Moses is God's prophet, and therefore the entire Torah by extension is also the word of God, because this proves it. Okay, so that's the big banner news. But of course, it is so many other things. This moment, it is a direct encounter with God, an entire people having a direct encounter with God. So it's a spiritual peak for these people. It is presented as the greatest encounter with God that the world has ever known. It also, just in terms of the narrative of the Torah, it's a twist. It's a new layer, which is that now the people have a mission, and the people have a set of laws. The people have a way of conducting themselves in the world, and that much we didn't necessarily expect. This is a surprise to them. So there's many things that this moment represents, but what I want to look at today is the way in which this experience also represents great danger, very dangerous event, very dangerous setting, very dangerous. The whole scene is full of fraught with danger, and so I want to try to understand where the danger is coming from. And this is one of those classes where I don't have a fully worked out theory. I'm not sure what the answer to this question is. So I will need your help to think through this. So let's get into it. Let's say a blessing over Torah study and over the giving of Torah itself, which we're commemorating this week. And let's have in mind, as we often do these days, that Torah study is merapeh, is a healing force in the world. There's just I know so many sick people right now. It's a sick time. So may this learning bring some healing into the world. All right. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay, so here is the scene. The people have left Egypt. They are traveling through the desert. Just last week, they crossed the Red Sea, right? So this all happens very, very quickly. They're now wandering into the desert. It's been a couple of months, and suddenly there is an announcement, a new announcement. And this is what I mean when I say it isn't as if God said early on, "Oh, I'll deliver you from Egypt, and then you will come to Mount Sinai, and I'm going to do this incredible thing that will become the most significant event in your people's collective memory for all of history." In fact, it's the Exodus which has taken all of our attention. It's the Exodus which is the big deal. It's the Exodus which God is to be celebrated for, which forges the covenant. It seems like it could have just been the Exodus. And then chapter 19 of the book of Exodus opens and God suddenly says, now you've seen what I've done, and I've delivered you from Egypt, and I've carried you on angels' wings, and you've seen what I've done. Remind the people of what I've done. And that's the first few verses in chapter 19. And then here, I'm going to give you a source sheet. And then here, here all of a sudden comes the announcement, and it's in verse 9 of chapter 19. The Eternal said to Moses, Hine anochi ba elecha be'av he'anan. I am going to come to you in a thick cloud. Bavur yishma ha'am b'dabri imach, so that the people may hear when I speak with you. V'gam b'cha yaminu le'olam, and so they will trust you forever after this. Okay. So that actually, we could spend a lot of time just on that. That actually is an interesting, it's not clear why God's coming down. And initially it seems that the point is to verify Moses's prophecy more than to speak to the people directly. God is saying, the people will hear me speaking to you. And as I said, this does become a legitimization of Moses's prophecy. So that makes some sense, but we could talk about that for an hour. What exactly is God trying to do here? But our focus will be elsewhere today. So let's keep going. And Moses reported the people's words to the Eternal. This also is a little confusing. It's as if Moses went down, told them this, and then Moses came back and reported what the people said. Again, lots to study here in the commentaries. What exactly is the back and forth of the dialogue? And it will continue to be a little confusing. Moses is scrambling up and down the mountain. So we'll take note of this dialogue, but you'll see it's this bolded section that we're really going to pay attention to. Okay. The Eternal said to Moses, go. Now God has some messages of warning for the people. Messages of warning for the people. And as I count them, there are 3 things that God wants the people to do. Okay, and let's take note of that because I'm not sure that all 3 get done. Okay, so here are the 3 things. The Eternal said to Moses, go to the people and warn them to sanctify themselves. Lech el ha'am v'kidashtam hayom u'machar. Now, this is a difficult translation. You may know the word. Kidashtam is like kedusha or holiness. So I've translated as sanctify, though in this context, it probably better means separate themselves, because that's what, the 7th day, the Sabbath day, is holy because it is set aside. So it has that double meaning. And I'm not sure exactly the translation that I got on Sefaria said to keep themselves pure for today and tomorrow. It doesn't use the language of pure. I see where they're getting it from holiness. I've translated it as sanctify themselves, but it also means to separate themselves, to keep themselves apart. Okay, so that's one. And then perhaps related to at least the ideas of sanctity or purity, then they also are to wash their clothes. The kipsu simlotam. Okay, is that one big instruction? Be pure and wash your clothes, separate yourself and wash your clothes. But it seems like there's a couple of things there. So I'm counting 2. Sanctify themselves and wash their clothes. Okay, let them be ready for the 3rd day, for on the 3rd day, the Eternal will come down in the eyes of all the people on Mount Sinai. Okay, whoa. Okay, this is it. I'm going to be talking to the entire people. Never has there been an indication that was going to happen. Now it's going to happen. This is our focus, though, for today, folks. So it's these lines that we're going to really spend time trying to make sense of. V'higbalta et ha'am saviv. You shall set boundaries for the people all the way around, roundabout. Lemor, saying, beware of going up the mountain or touching the border of it. Hishamru lechem alot bahar ungoa bikatsehu. Whoever touches the mountain shall die. Kol hanogea bahar mot yumat. Mot yumat. Now this phrase here, shall die, the translation I received said, shall be put to death, because that's exactly the phrasing that we use in all kinds of laws later. If you kill someone or break the Shabbat, or lots of things that incur the death penalty, mot yumat, that person shall be put to death, is the way we're translating it. I did not translate it that way. I just said shall die because it's a little funny. It sounds like a court case. But then again, it's not so clear what it means to say that whoever goes up the mountain will die, or whoever crosses the border or touches the mountain will die. And then, as if to explain that confusion, how will they die? God says something even more mysterious. Lo tigabo yad. Note, no hand shall touch that person, but he shall be either stoned or shot. That's okay. There's stoning back in those days. There's no guns, but there are arrows. So it's like somehow nobody's going to touch that person, but they'll die anyway, with stones flying at them, or it's obviously there's something happening here that is supernatural, but it's not clear what. Whether beast or man, he shall not live. Okay. All right. And then there's this phrase, which I literally don't know how to, I don't think anyone knows how to translate this. So we're going to pretty much ignore it, but I'll read it because it's here. Only when the ram's horn sounds a jubilee blast, they may go up on the mountain. I don't know exactly. I don't know exactly what that means. There are notes all over the translations. Like, we don't know what this means. Okay. Fine. That's our line. And that is, I'm soon going to turn to, oops. Well, sure. Let's make it public. I'm soon going to, hold on. Let me just move this back up. I'm soon going to turn to you and ask you why God is setting these boundaries and what is so dangerous that God is God threatening to kill, or is, okay. I'm soon going to ask you this, but let's just finish up the passage, because it's important to see that this information gets repeated, and it's not clear if it even gets communicated. Okay, so just keeping track here. Separate themselves, wash their clothes, and draw a boundary, and do not let them cross that boundary. Do not let them touch the mountain. Nobody should touch the mountain. If anyone touches the mountain, they die. They die in ways, nobody's going to touch them. They'll just die. Okay, so that's the instruction. And then Moses goes down and he does sanctify the people, and they do wash their clothes. And then Moses says something that God never said. And he said to the people, be ready for the third day. Do not go near a woman. Meaning, don't have sex. But in the language of the patriarchy, right, speaking to men, al tigshu el isha. Don't go near a woman. Now, God did not say that. Or at least we don't have record of God saying that. Is it Moses' understanding of what it means to sanctify yourself or to be pure or clean? I don't know. But God did not say that. What God did say was tell them not to approach the mountain. And this Moses doesn't seem to say. It's as if Moses replaced one of the three with don't have sex. Okay. Now, I want to highlight this both because it's a little strange, a lot strange, but also because the language that Moses uses to say don't have sex is don't go near a woman. And that language of going near, of course, is very important for our whole conversation. Right? Don't go near the mountain. Don't cross the boundary. So Moses uses that language, but to say something else entirely. And God notices this. God seems to notice that there's an omission, and God says, the third day, there's thunder, there's lightning, dense cloud, a loud blast of the horn. All the people were in the camp trembled. Moses led the people out of the camp. They took their place at the foot of the mountain. Mount Sinai was all in smoke. Now it's happening, the main event. And the Eternal had come down upon it in fire. The smoke rose like the smoke of a kiln, and the whole mountain trembled violently, and the blare of the horn grew louder and louder. And as Moses spoke, God answered him in thunder. Now, here it begins. Vayered Adonai al Har Sinai. The Eternal One came down upon Mount Sinai. El Rosh Har, on the top of the mountain. Now, that should be it. From that moment, we should start hearing the Ten Commandments. The God came down. There was 3 days of preparation, and then it's time. God comes down the mountain. I am the Lord your God. Right? That's what we should hear. But not quite yet, because God suddenly seems to realize, at least the way I'm reading it, that something's missing. So God says the following to Moses. God comes down on the mountain, but then God calls Moses up to the top of the mountain. And Moses went up. Like, can you imagine? Moses is like, wait, why am I going up? What do you mean? We're ready. And the Eternal said to Moses, go down and warn the people not to break through to the Eternal to gaze, lest many of them perish. Yeah, I'll read it in Hebrew. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe, red ha'ed ba'am, go warn the people. Pen yehersu el Adonai, lest they come and they break through the boundary. They destroy the boundary. Lirot, in order to see, in order to gaze. In order to gaze. V'nafal mimenu rav, and then many of them will die. Many of them will fall. Okay? God had to repeat that information, and I'm not surprised because Moses didn't say it. And God then adds, and also the priests, Gam Kohanim, who do come near the Eternal. This, by the way, same language that Moses used, don't go near a woman. So the priests who do come near to God, Nigashim, they should also sanctify themselves, lest the Eternal break out against them. And now the most confusing moment in the interchange, as far as I'm concerned altogether, is that Moses said to the Eternal, yeah, the people can't come up to Mount Sinai because you already told us, saying set boundaries around the mountain and sanctify it. There's something missing there. There's something missing, like God tells Moses 3 things. Moses delivers 2 out of the 3 and then adds 1 of his own, missing the key information. God seems to notice that and says, hey, remember to tell the people not to come near me, because if they do, they'll die. And Moses says, you already told us that. No, I know. They can't. You already said that. It's like, yeah, but you didn't tell them that. Or did he? Are we getting all the information? So the dialogue itself is confusing. But the central question here is why? What is the concern? So let's just finish up the last 2 lines of the passage, and then I want to turn to you and ask you, what is the concern? What is God worried about? Okay, so just the last couple of lines here, where God repeats it once again. So the Eternal said to him, go down and come back together with Aaron, but let not the, I read through that quickly, but that's strange too. Come back together with Aaron, but do not let the priests or the people break through, same language, to come up to the Eternal, lest the Eternal break out against them. And Moses went down to the people and spoke to them, and then 10 commandments. Okay, that's it. Then God spoke all these words, 10 commandments, hooray. Okay, but you can see there's a real concern here. God's got a concern right from the start, and Moses is somehow failing to fully communicate it. At least God doesn't think Moses, and Moses is saying other things. So it's a confusing scene, but one thing is clear, which is that God is saying, get back. Do not come close to me. Do not touch. Do not get anywhere near me, or you'll die. Now, why? Why? What's so dangerous? So let's start with Matt.
2 things. One, I just wonder, and I don't have any backing for this, whether the don't go near a woman is a scribal issue, that they've rewritten the story. And the reason I say that is because I think the Aaron being mentioned later is a adding into the story, that there's the version without that Moses does stuff, and then there's Moses and Aaron because the priests want Aaron. but directly to your question, I think there is this notion that it is actually deadly. This isn't a warning about I will do. There's a number of times where we see this where it's actually deadly to do that. They're not saying, if you do that, I'm going to do something. But touching this kills.
Good.
Protect yourself, because touching it, because being by God just kills by its nature. It's not some action or decision. It's the way the world is.
Okay,
this is poisonous.
Perfect. Matt answers the question, and in doing so, makes the question a sharper one for us. In other words, given that God is concerned that people get too close lest they die, is it that God will kill them and will be angry that they got too close, that God is offended by their disobedience or their presence, or is it that this is danger? God is dangerous. It's like a third rail. Don't touch the third rail. The train's working fine. You can get on the train, but do not touch the third rail. That's what God is, and God knows that. So that's Matt reads the story that way, and I think it's a strong reading that God is describing some inevitable danger, not some delivery of a death penalty, right? And let's remember, I'm going to throw in another source here because it echoes this notion that Matt is giving us, that the people seem to feel the same way. And this passage is probably even more famous. The introduction to the Ten Commandments, we just like breathe through because we want to get to the Ten Commandments. But the moment after, we do usually notice. And in the moment after, the people say, all the people saw the thunder and lightning and the blare of the horn and the mountain smoking. This is after the Ten Commandments. And when the people saw it, they fell back and they stood at a distance. And they said, you speak to us and we will listen, but let not God speak to us lest we die. That sounds like what Matt is saying. The people their experience of God is, this is too much. It will kill us. We cannot handle this, right? And that's what God has been saying. I'm too much. You cannot handle it. It will kill you. Now, then the question is why? But Matt has given us an avenue to pursue here. Could it be that God is just dangerous? And why is that so? What does it mean? I mean, maybe that's an unanswerable question, but why is that so? Since I introduced that text, let me just finish it off because Moses says something interesting. Moses says, don't be afraid. God has come only in order to test you, in order that the fear of God may ever be with you, so that you do not go astray. So the people stayed at a distance while Moses got close. There's that language of getting close again, okay? Pay attention to the getting close and the staying away and the getting close. And there are a lot of key words here, right? They stood at a distance. They stood at a distance again, but Moses got close. Okay, so Matt has answered a question that he implies, which is it that God wants to kill or that God is dangerous? Matt says God is somehow just dangerous, and the people seem to agree. So what do you think of that? And why would God be dangerous? All right, let's hear from our deadhead, our resident deadhead, Noah Pollack.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting the instructions Moses and God give that they have to wash their clothes, separate themselves. Moses adds the caveat of not being with your wife, but the same with the other two, and then building a boundary. I saw that boundary as being like the boundary it later says to build around the Torah and to guard it jealously. But with the separation, that was just confusing because I'm seeing the actions between the men or women and their wives, men and their wives, X and Y, whoever together as bringing God more into this world. And it's saying that we have to refrain from our humanistic desires in order to fully receive God and to make ourselves so separate from this mortalness that we can really gain entrance to that heavenly plane.
Okay, great. This is a different answer, and it is, if Matt's answer was, this is just, it's electric, it's the third rail, don't touch it, nobody can control that it will destroy you. No, I'm hearing in Noah's description a little bit of a different kind of answer, which is that there's a lesson here, which is that there are holy things. This is the holiest of things. And so you can't get, first of all, there's a certain kind of respect. It's holy. You don't just run up to it. There's a certain kind of respect, but also there's a process. You have to become holy to approach the holy. And Noah points out, we'll describe the Torah that way. We'll certainly describe the tabernacle and the temple and the altar that way. You can't go too close to the altar. And the priest, and maybe that's why God keeps mentioning the priests. The priests can go into the temple, but they have to purify themselves. And maybe we're getting a kind of a primer here in what it takes to approach the holy. And if only priests can go into the temple, and the temple is one of our holiest things, then who can go to Mount Sinai? No one. Moses only, maybe Aaron. Okay, so that's a little, it may still, kill you, but it will kill you because you haven't learned what it takes. You haven't followed the guidelines of holiness, of approaching in holiness. Okay, so it's a little bit of a different answer. Leah Matsui?
Yeah, I go with the high voltage theory. Danger, high voltage, do not go further, or those signs telling us that it's radioactive and we can't go close. Only Moses has, for whatever reason, maybe he got it at the burning bush, I'll call it the hazmat suit. Only he can go close. I think there's Midrash discussing Moses separating himself from Jochebed, from his wife. And but Aaron and Miriam, who are also gifted with the ability gifted with prophecy, don't separate themselves from sex, as far as I understand. But it's almost like he is a lightning rod. He's the only one who's the lightning rod for the energy, and he can't share that with his partner. So he has to separate himself from his wife.
Okay, beautiful. This is beautiful. Beautiful. This is a kind of a third theory, though all of these theories are compatible, right? As Leah starts by saying, I'm with Matt on the third rail theory, but Leah adds a kind of an exception clause, which is the Moses clause, and that there's something distinct about Moses, and part of what this whole passage is emphasizing is the unique ability of Moses to be the lightning rod. For some reason, Moses can go on the mountain, can talk to God directly, Moses can cross the boundaries that the other people can't cross. Maybe Aaron can come up with him sometimes, but part of what we're getting is a kind of a tiered system, and certain kinds of encounter with God only Moses can have. Now, I want to read to you a very similar interpretation from the Sforno, Ovadia Sforno, 15th century Italian commentator. Mostly, we're not going too far into the commentaries, but I thought this one was particularly nice, and I think it does echo exactly what Leah was saying, which is, says the Sforno, go down and warn the people not to break through when I speak to them, because perhaps they will think that they have ascended to the level of face-to-face prophecy. Olim lemadriget nuvuat panim bapanim, kamocha, like you, and that they can go up past the boundary line. Okay? So maybe the problem is the people are going to think, oh, we're all Moses now. Look, we're all standing around talking to God, and God gets it because God's going to be speaking to them directly. But that doesn't mean they can just run up the mountain. Yes, you are going to receive a prophecy unlike anything that your average citizen has ever received before, because what's distinct about this is everyone's getting it. God is speaking to the entire nation, not just to Moses. But it's still true that Moses is distinct, and Moses is special, and Moses is unusual. Now, I'm going to keep taking interpretations, but I do want to also say here, now that we're beginning to talk about the danger of encountering God and to highlight Moses as perhaps exceptional, I'm sure some of you are thinking, and we ought to mention now, yeah, Moses is exceptional, but there is another famous scene that describes Moses wanting to see God and being told that Moses can't because if he does, he will die. So let's just take a look at that for a sec. So it's in our conversation. Later on, when Moses is up on Mount Sinai, Moses says, "Oh, let me see your glory," or your presence, or your kavod, your honor, whatever it is. Kavod is the word. And God answered, "I will make all my goodness pass before you, and I will proclaim before you the name of the Eternal, and the grace that I grant, and the compassion that I show." But God said, "Lo yireni adam v'chai, lo tuchal lirot et panai." You cannot see my face. So even for Moses, there's some things that are too far, and what Moses cannot see is the face of God. Nobody can. No person can see God's face and live. Now, that's an interesting phrase. Can they see God's face and not live? Or is God's face not a thing that can be seen? It's not so clear from the verse. But even Moses can't see it. And then at the end, we learn that God's got, he's got an alternate encounter, which is that Moses stations himself on a rock. And as my glory, God says, passes by, I'll put you in the cleft of the rock and shield you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will take my hand away and you will see my back, but my face must not be seen. I love this. I love this moment. And we could spend an hour or two just teasing out what's exactly going on there. But I bring it here just to show you that Leah's onto something, or the Sephorno's onto something, that Moses has this unusual ability to speak to God. Remember, when the people said, "Lest we die," Moses says, "All right, I'm going up then," and that's just fine. But Moses can't get all the way there either, right? So, and not just he can't, if he does, he'll die. Okay, so death is a possibility for anyone here who gets too close, sees the face, disobeys the commandment, whatever it is. All right, so let's keep going and hearing interpretations from the group. Ariella?
Well, what I think is it's about too much knowledge, that it's like the people are a child and you can only give a certain amount of knowledge to a child because it'll be beyond them and they'll get hurt or injured. And everybody has a limit, and this is the limit of the children of Israel, and Moses has his own limit. And it's about when you're in a relationship with God that there are limitations. Right. And knowledge can kill you too much.
Good. Oh, I love that last sentence, Ariella, because suddenly you remind me of the Garden of Eden. Yeah. Right. And you remind me of the way that there's always been restrictions. There's always been boundaries. God's always teasing us, playing a little game of like, oh, I want to be close to you. I have things that I might offer you, but be very, very careful. Right. That's been true from the start. Okay. So I like that connection. And Ariella also amplifies the comments that we've just heard from Leah and from the Sforno, that pay attention to the Sforno's language is they thought they had ascended to the level of face-to-face prophecy, right? As Ariella says, they thought, they thought we're ready now. Look, I mean, God delivered us from Egypt and now God's coming down to talk to us. Surely we're like, let's love God. Let's embrace God, right? Let's go right up. No, you might think so, but you're not there. You're You're in a good place, but you're not there. Okay, Susan Schlesinger.
My thought on it was very different, but it was almost like distinguishing how Hashem was to be treated versus idols, because idols people would go right up to talk to, possibly touch, because they've got a very physical presence. And here we're dealing with something which is a much more spiritual concept, very different, almost the opposite. And to me, it seemed like a differentiation from what they might do with an idol versus what they're going to do with Hashem.
Okay, Susan, thank you so much for that. Because Susan makes a connection here that I wanted to get to eventually, but we'll take a look at it now. There's a connection here. Susan says, let's contrast the relationship that we are being told to have with God, relationship of proximity, right, that we're being told to have with God, with the kind of relationship you might expect to have with an idol, an actual idol, like a statue, where you might be able to go up and see God and touch God and kiss God, and right? It becomes the central prohibition in our faith. No, that's not God. That you can't do that. But we think of it as just like that's an intellectual mistake. That's a spiritual mistake. That's just not the right relationship to have with God, because God's not physical. So, okay, so Susan suggests that like maybe that's part of how this is playing out, is that this is all an extension of the intangibility of God. Okay, so let me make this connection a little stronger here, because there's a passage in Deuteronomy that I think does some of the work of, we have a lot of theories now on the table, but I think this connection that Susan is suggesting, the connection to the prohibition on idolatry, is an important one. And I want you to take a look at some of the language, the key language in this passage in Deuteronomy, which is, remember, Deuteronomy is Moses talking. So it's almost like Moses explaining this scene backwards. And look at what Moses says here. Okay, this is in Deuteronomy chapter 4. We're not going to read the whole thing, but we're going to look at some key phrases. The day you stood before the Eternal your God at Horeb, and the Eternal said to you, gather me the people that I may let them hear my words, in order that they may learn to revere me as long as they live on earth, so and may so teach their children. You came close, right? I'm noting all the times that we use language of close. You came close and you stood at the foot of the mountain. The mountain was ablaze with flames to the very skies, dark with the densest clouds. Now, listen to this language. Vaydaber Adonai Elechem mitoch ha'esh. God spoke to you out of the fire. Kol dvarim atem shomim. You heard the sounds of words. Utmuna einchem roim. But you did not see a picture. Tmuna. Zulati kol, only a voice. Now, that word, and this is not a great picture is the modern Hebrew translation for tmuna, and it could be translated as shape or form or representation. I translate it as picture every time, just so we could just so it would stand out, right? So you didn't see a picture of God, you only heard the sound of God, okay? Now, Moses goes on, and God declared to you the covenant, the 10 commandments, 2 tablets of stone, on and on and on. But Moses repeats, guard your lives carefully then, since you saw no picture. There it is again, kol tmuna, you saw no picture. Act not wickedly and make for yourselves a sculpture or picture. I should bold all of these, right? Just so we see how often Moses says it. You saw no picture of any likeness whatsoever, the form of a man or a woman, the form of a beast on the earth, the form of any winged bird that flies in the sky, the form, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. No picture, no picture. And then finally, take care not to forget the covenant that the eternal God forged with you, and not to make for yourselves a sculpture or picture of anything against which the eternal God has enjoined you. Because, and this is like quite a punchline, a final phrase, because the eternal, your God, Esh Ochlahu, is a consuming fire. Elkanah, an impassioned God. Okay, now that scene Remember, you only heard things. You didn't see anything. So don't make any pictures. Never make any pictures. There was no picture. You only heard a voice. Keep that in mind, because guard your lives, because God is a consuming fire. Now, it's quite a phrase, and it sort of fits into our conversation. God is a consuming, I guess God can burn people up. God, okay. But it's the word picture there that gets repeated so often that I want us to pay attention to, as Susan wanted us to pay attention to, because where do we see that word very prominently? Just in the midst of the scene we were looking at, right? Some of you probably thinking the second commandment. The second commandment. Let's go back for a second, and then I'm gonna open it up again to the 10 commandments. Here they are. God spoke all these words, saying, Anochi Hashem Elokecha asher hotzeiticha me'eretz Mitzrayim mibeit avadim. That's the first commandment. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. Here's the prohibition on idolatry. Lo yeh lecha Elohim acherim al panai. Now, first of all, I have to point out that before me in Hebrew literally is on my face. Al panai. We've seen God's face, or we've talked about God's face. We haven't seen God's face, but we've talked about it before. So that's interesting. But then in the next verse, we get our key word. Don't make for yourself a sculptured image or any picture. V'chol tmuna, there it is, of what is in the heavens above or in the earth below. Do not do that. And if those weren't enough echoes, it's also true that I, the eternal your God, am an impassioned God. Okay, same language there at the bottom where we looked at God being described as a consuming fire and impassioned God. Okay, that's a lot of connection. And it makes me think that Susan is on to something. So I don't know exactly what to do with it yet, but there seems to be something about the prohibition on representing God in visual form. Remember, God warned them not to break up, to gaze at God, to look at God. You hear God, that's fine, but you're not face to face. You don't see God's face. Even Moses couldn't see God's face. So don't think that you're going to see God's face, and don't try to represent God, right? That's clear. Something major is going on here. I'm gonna stop there, but I thank Susan for that, because there's a really important thread to chase down here. Okay, let's keep going. Hal and Kathy.
Yeah, I think this is really great. I mean, I definitely am of the school that it doesn't seem like it needs so much explanation as to why being too close to God is dangerous. I mean, that seems kind of, the high voltage, but what I'm sort of struck with is going back to that first kind of a warning from to Moses, that beware of going up the mountain or touching the border of it, that's the one he, doesn't kind of implement exactly. But I'm really struck with what that means. Like, what's the border? Like, what's the mountain? Where does the mountain begin? I mean, it's not that clear. When you're going up a mountain, I've gone up plenty of mountains, and, like, when does the mountain start and where's the border of it? And there's not a sort of clear space. So to me, that kind of, that almost makes it, sort of more difficult, the fact that there's not an exact clear border. And what it reminds me of is the way we're always dealing with that. The fact that, we can talk about light and dark and day and night and that sort of thing, but there's so much, seems to me to be so much emphasis on the borderlands, between them, that even Ma'ariv Aravim is about the mixing that takes place at the borders between, day and night, and all that sort of thing. So there's something about the border not being that clear, and that somehow, we can talk liminal space, or we can talk, just ambiguity. I don't know, that there's something there. And then sort of linking it to seeing and hearing, I'm wondering if that's kind of the border, is like between, you don't see and hear things at the same place. You always hear things much faster than you see things. And, and where it's really obvious is when it thunders, the difference between hearing thunder and seeing lightning. And so I don't know. I just wonder if there's something about that.
Thank you so much for that, Kathy. First of all, incredibly insightful, incisive comment there, that God says make a border around Sinai, but it's not so clear where the border would begin. And maybe this makes sense to the fact that Moses comes back and says, yeah, we heard, you don't go up and touch the mountain, but God's saying, no, but there's a borderline. There's a specific, there's certain boundary past which you cannot go. And we see this again and again. Later on, Moses ascends with Aaron and the elders to a certain point on the mountain, and then they stay and Moses goes up further, right? So there's a lot of that question of what exactly is the boundary line. And then I love, so first of all, thank you for that, because that element of ambiguity, of uncertainty around where exactly the boundary line is, I think is a very helpful note to enter into this conversation. But what you did at the end there, Kathy, it was to suggest that we can begin to abstract this a bit, because there's the literal physical boundary line, sure, and that's part of what we're trying to figure out. Where can they go halfway up the mountain, just as soon as it starts to ascend? Like, how far back do they have to be? So all of those physical, geographical questions are relevant. But Kathy suggests, think about the border as a kind of a more spiritual or intellectual boundary line. What does it mean to get too close to God? Maybe not just physically, but what does it mean to get to try to have a relationship with God that it is impossible to have, or to get I can actually see God. I can actually touch God. Like, that's dangerous language. Even if you take the physicality out of it, there's something about that that's like, no, that's the opposite. That's the whole point. You cannot get all the way there. That's what our God is unknowable. So to think that you have to be careful of that boundary line as well. Okay, so and this is good because I think I want us to be able to look at this scene and not just worry about the third rail, but also the larger message of what it is the Torah is saying is just too much God, too much knowledge of God, too much encounter. What is that? What is that exactly? Okay, let's keep going. Jen?
I feel so off the rails with the third rail theory, like so much. And the thing that's knocking me off the rails is the second half of that, which says, lest you be stoned or shot. Like, that's not you, oh shoot, you saw my fire, you're going to be burned up. Oops, I or someone else am shooting arrows at you if you cross that boundary. To the point that when we first read it, I actually thought that God was telling the people to set that boundary themselves and enforce it on somebody who passed it. So to me, like, this sounds a lot, and I don't know that that's the case, although like arrows raining down from heaven just is the silliest image to me. It just doesn't fit. So like, to me, I'm reading it much more as this particular passage as being about like ritual and respect than being about like the power of God, because like the power of God is not rocks coming out of nowhere. It's that fire and thunder and those big dramatic things. So like, to me, this passage it sticks out. It just feels different than the other things that we're reading.
Good. Okay, Jen makes the point we've been approaching even stronger by saying it's the physicality of it all is almost like absurd. It's not just, we might want to abstract this a little, go beyond, but it's just like, what do you mean God's going to be throwing rocks at you if you get too close to God? Like that, what is going on? Like, there must, and so Jen begins to stake a claim in the other side of the debate that Matt set up for us, which is that this isn't about, oh, don't touch that button. This is about back off, have some respect for God. This is God. Just don't rush the stage. It's God, right? Because what is it? Otherwise, there's something kind of silly about it. And God's angry, and I'm going to throw things at you, or I'm going to get you. You know, that's something about. Yeah. Okay. Great. Julia Berg.
Yeah, I think there's one line, verse 17, that kind of just feels funny. It says, "Don't be afraid. This is so that you can be afraid, but forever." but not really like for being afraid right now. But it also seems like so much of this whole process is saying, and you should be afraid, but perhaps not so much that it scares you off, I guess, from participating in this revelation. And so in many ways, it feels like it's setting up a process for later, and it's not, as much as this is for the right now, it's also for, the generations to come. And what does that mean for people, I don't know, like us today, who aren't in that moment of revelation, but are perhaps in a moment of ongoing revelation, and how should we approach that, and what's that level of respect that Jen's talking about, that we need to have if we're not at that physical mountain.
Okay, great. Thank you for taking us to that scene after the Ten Commandments, because we just read it very quickly, but there's perhaps the best explanation of the scene that we're going to get. They say we're going to die, and Moses says, no, don't be afraid, because God is, and it's a funny phrase, as Julia points out, don't be afraid because God wants you to be afraid, right? I mean, it literally says that. Al tira'u, don't be afraid, because God wants the fear of God to be on your faces. Right. So, okay, so this seems to be a kind of, this is a kind of a revealing of the message behind the message, maybe. That God is saying Moses is saying this whole thing was a test. This whole thing was maybe not a test, or maybe it was an exercise to get you to realize how terrifying, how awesome, how overwhelming this is. And it's as if Moses is saying almost, no, don't worry, you're not really going to die. The boundaries were, I mean, I don't know. I don't mean to make it so casual, but it's almost like Moses saying, it's not what you think it is. It's not like you're going to explode. It's that you had to have a healthy fear and respect for the awesomeness of God. And it's almost like Moses is abstracting our scene. It's not literal. It's about the sense of, I would never go near God. I am in awe of God. We use words like yira, fear, and we know that they echo strongly in our tradition. Sometimes we don't like them. Do I really want to fear God? But just let's remember that in our sort of traditional lexicon, the two words that we use for primary words we use for relationship with God are love, ahava, and fear, yira. And those two kind of sentiments also represent movements. If I love God, I will come close to God. If I fear God, I will back away from God. And both of those are seen as good things in the tradition. It's good to want to come close to God, to love God so much. It's also good / important / required / would be dangerous not to stay away from God, because God is too much. So how do you negotiate that? And maybe Moses is saying, yeah, no, I know it's overwhelming. Now you're getting it, that you can't just give God a hug. It's not like that. And God wanted to show you how not like that it was. Okay, so so thanks for bringing us back to that scene. All right, we have time for just a couple more comments. Stan Hammerman. Stan, unfortunately, I'm not hearing you. You are unmuted, but I'm not hearing your voice. I don't think so. All right, for now, I'm sorry, I'm not hearing you. I'm going to go to Bob.
Yeah, so I'm seeing some parallels to our discussion last week when we were trying to find the words that would describe manna coming from heaven, and how it was just so difficult to have the human experience that could describe what was coming down from the heavens. And I think here, I think God wants to set up these limits because he knows that humans, with their limited ways of understanding things, are going to somehow mess it up. They're going to have pictures or idols, or they're going to want to try to come close to what the experience is, but in the end, they're going to fail. And I think that, you know, these prohibitions, knowing that people are going to fail, you know, God says, you know, you're going to be stoned, or, you know, because he just doesn't want people to even toy with that and to sort of get used to the fact that there's this unknowable, and whether the unknowable is maybe a little bit more minor, like manna coming down from heaven, or, you know, the ultimate, which is trying to get close to and understand God. People just have to get used to the fact that there's some things that they're not going to understand because it's just not within our experience or our ways of describing things.
Okay, excellent, excellent, excellent. So Bob takes us back to this second commandment problem of representing God, making an image of God, a picture of God, and Bob begins to tie that general prohibition that becomes one of the great prohibitions in our religion directly to the experience that they are having at Mount Sinai. And maybe that's what Moses is doing as well in Deuteronomy when he says, you stood at Mount Sinai. Remember, there was no picture there. And remember, you don't make pictures of God. In other words, the great worry, I think Bob is beginning to articulate for us, the great worry that God has is that Sinai will be such a powerful experience. You will have such close contact with God that you will think you know what God is and that you saw God. I mean, because you did see something. You saw a mountain on fire. You saw, like, on some level, the presence of God. And I will say there's even, God even messes up a bit when God says, I'm going to come down, let's see, I'm going to come down. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Down the mountain. Where is it? I'm looking for the word eyes. Where is it? There. Eyes of all the people. Let them be ready for the third day, for on the third day the Eternal will come down in the eyes of all the people. Even God messes up there and suggests that the people will see God, right? But they won't. And that's important. And there was never any sight of God. That's core to our religion. But this is pretty close. God is on the mountain, and the mountain is flaming, and you have a tangible physical experience of God. So be careful that you don't use this experience to violate the very commandment you got from this experience, to make a picture of this, because now we can make a picture of the mountain. So just start to trace God right on top of the mountain. That's the danger. In other words, the revelation at Mount Sinai, the greatest encounter with God we've ever had, in itself is dangerous. For God to reveal to the people some great presence is dangerous, because it's very easy once you have a moment like that to think, now I can touch God, now I can see God, now I can know God. And yes, God wants us to know God, but it's dangerous, because don't think you can know too much, or else you're in the land of idolatry. You're in the land of error. And that idolatry, after all, does incur the death penalty. You do, if you start worshiping idols, then you will be put to death, right? So the very revelation which tells you that also invites you to idolize the experience itself. And that's part of the danger, right? So unfortunately, we have to stop here. I think we've gotten to some good places. There's obviously more to do here, but I wish you a happy revelation. Just, be careful.